Hi and welcome to LawWiser, India's first video-only knowledge-sharing platform on law and policy. Today we have a very interesting discussion on startups, accelerating the startups rather. We all know that every successful startup business, matures and goes through various stages of growth, and every stage has its own set of needs and challenges as well. These days we see a lot of new age tech startups on NFT, crypto, blockchain, and a lot of them. I'm sure they must be having their own set of needs and the challenges that they're facing. So today in our discussion, we would be focusing on how these startups, need to navigate and have a robust legal support as well. At the same time, we try to understand how these legal aspects are involved in every stage of a company, and how it's important to understand them for a better navigation for growth purposes. So to discuss this, we have a great panel with us today. First to introduce, we have a seasoned startup founder with us. We have Mr. Milan Ganatra. He's the founder and CEO of One Silver Bullet. He has started his journey towards building, technology-led solutions for financial services sector way back in 1999 with Mild Software, and is now actively involved in investing in finance companies. And joining him, we have, partners from Universal Legal. We have Mohit Kapoor, who is the founder of Universal Legal, with over 25 years of, cross-border experience across a wide spectrum of business across the world. Joining him, his colleague Henna Poojara is a senior associate, and our firm, Universal Legal, focuses on corporate private equity M&A. It's also a full-service firm based in Mumbai with capabilities across India and associates in 50 countries in the world. So welcome, Mohit, Henna, and Milan. Thank you for taking time out for this interesting conversation today. So to begin with, as we just talked about the startups and, the growth stages, which is very crucial. So, just to begin with, if you all can highlight, one of you can just highlight what are the pertinent aspects that a startup should focus on at the existence of a beginning stage.
Sure. So the beginning stage is actually the most important stage for any startup. I think the first step would be for them to actually decide the structure. So are you going to be a company? Are you going to be an LLP? Are you going to be a partnership? That would be the first step. Secondly, after that, you have to look at your internal housekeeping. So if you have a co-founder, it's very important to have a watertight agreement with your co-founder, because going ahead in the future, you don't want any problems to come up. Also, you have to see how many people are sitting on your cap table. So very often at the initial stages, we tend to give away a lot of ESOPs, or we get on board an angel investor. So we need to see how many people are sitting on our cap table and what are the rights that we're giving away at the very beginning of the firm. Because going ahead, when you get on more sophisticated investors, you will be giving away more rights, you'll be giving away more shareholding. So at the initial stage, we have to make sure that we're not giving away too much. We're not having too many people sitting on our cap table. We're not over-promising a lot of things. And I think the other important thing is that at the initial stages itself, we should ensure that we have agreements internally with employees. We have agreements with vendors. We have agreements with suppliers, customers. And these should all have all the important clauses that later on don't backfire. So when your company gets more mature, when your business starts to grow, at that point in time, none of these contractual sort of problems should come into play. So this is something that in the initial stage, if your housekeeping is good, if you've incorporated your company well, if you have good agreements, a clear cap table, going ahead, it's very easy and smooth to get in more investment rounds, get in foreign investment and all of that.
Yeah, just to add to what Henna said, I think that I'd like to add 2 points. One is on intellectual property. So it's very critical that if you're in, especially in a tech-related business, that your IP, whether it's your source code or whether it's your trademark logo, is protected at the outset. The second thing is to have a very robust founders agreement. So for instance, if you have co-founders, the most critical part is to keep that relationship cemented well through an agreement, rather than have that delayed at a later stage, because we all know that once a company takes off and becomes successful, issues between founders becomes a real issue. We are seeing now in the recent times. And so having a very robust founders agreement is very critical at the initial stages.
Yeah, so I agree to Henna and Mohit most of the things. But the real issue is that the startup does not know who and how to go about doing this. And there is no ready template available, to be very frank. And ideally, some of the law firms should really give this as a full kind of a solution package so that he knows how to really start this off. Because what I've realized, being a second-time entrepreneur, I made maybe some few of the mistakes which I would have done in my first one as well. Because a lot of times you try to use, I would so called your brains or your experience, but things have changed, things change dynamically, and everybody is not same. Let's say, as Mohit said, the co-founders agreement should be watertight, should be very critical. Now that may not be, you would not have experienced it the first time. So I think it's important that there has to be a holding hand, and a startup should allocate a reasonable amount of money to be spent on these legal and which is not a priority for them. That's what is, they think all of this can be done by them by asking an uncle or an auntie next door or a friend next door. So they don't do it in a proper way, and they finally end up. A lot of people finally end up in a mess or in a scenario where they didn't expect. Seeing eventually when the company grows, they have no capital to themselves. As Henna said. So I think most of these startups should be open to really reach out to the consultants who can really help them out on all these aspects. That's my 2 cents on this.
Perfect, Milan. And actually taking cue from there when you're talking about this, finance, as you just mentioned, is actually very critical for any startup founder, especially things like, where they need to consider fundraising, M&A and debt financing and strategic alliances. So I'm sure with your experience, you will be able to share certain inputs for, new age startup founders on them. Certain aspects that they need to be, careful about, or they need to have it in their mind.
Yeah, sure. Because these should be very clear whether I'm going to raise dumb capital or smart capital. What do I need the most? Obviously, I need money. One aspect is for sure. Now, because if, let's say at the initial phase, the typical issue of most of the startup is to really get revenue or generate business, right? And for that, you need network, you need expertise, you need several things, which sometimes you may get a lesser valuation, but somebody is going to help you on that. So you should be clear what are you really seeking at what stage. I think it's a very important factor to it, and not just look at valuation, because a lot of times you get I would so called your expected valuation, but the capital may not be able to help you on doing getting sales, end of the day, because I think that has to be the real focus around that. Yeah.
True.
Yeah, thanks, Milan. I agree with what Milan says. I think a lot of startup founders don't look at the value or quality of the investor. Many times they focus only on valuation. And, at times you need to understand what other value can the investor bring to you in terms of relationships that can drive your business. So, in a haste to raise capital, sometimes they lose focus on the fact that it's actually a strategic exercise that you need to think it through, and it has implications long term, and therefore you cannot just go about raising capital in any way. And usually it is always advisable to have a consultant who can come and help you think through this and give you some inputs as well.
Thanks, Mohit. Thanks, Milan, for actually sharing your views here. That also takes us to the next critical part of it. Like, we discussed the growth stage, we discussed the financing part, but there's one thing that, many startup founders probably don't pay attention to in the beginning while they're starting off is dispute resolution and litigation approach. Considering you'll be starting out, there will be so many agreements that you will be entering into. So, Mohit, this one's for you actually. How critical it is to have the right dispute resolution and litigation approach for a startup?
I think it's the most critical part, if you ask me, and it's the most undervalued part as well, because what happens is experienced founders understand this better than those who are first timers or first time startup founders, is that our regulatory and legal landscape is very complicated in India. You have courts across the country, you've got different jurisdictions, different aspects, and there are different sorts of disputes as well. So, let's look at internal disputes between founders as such. As I mentioned earlier, having a robust founder agreement, something which is watertight at the very beginning. I know those are difficult conversations to have, especially when you start with a new partner, but that's very critical. The second aspect is risk mitigation. So people undervalue the whole concept of risk mitigation in a business, and they don't spend enough time and resources on planning for what could happen when. So for instance, when you're running a business and you have contracts with vendors and customers, there's a concept called irregularities. So you need to have a certain system where you identify when an irregularity happens. For instance, if there is a delinquency in payment to be received by you as a company, what is your threshold? How many months can you go without your customer paying you? And on the other hand, what sort of credit terms have you negotiated with the vendor? What are the penalty clauses you have in a contract? And most people in a hurry kind of sign off on whatever is given to them without much thought to the default provisions, as I call them. Jurisdiction is another issue. Where would you be agitating your disputes? And when it actually comes to an irregularity turning into a claim, you need to be clear about whether or not you want to pick this battle or whether you want to settle it in a sensible way. So you need the right kind of guidance at that point of time instead of just rushing into litigation, serving a notice and filing a claim. How does that claim travel? So we all know that when you file a consumer claim or any kind of money claim in India, it takes several years. So you need the right strategic advice to tell you that this is what is worth fighting for and this is what is worth settling. And that really comes with experience for founders as well as for their advisors.
Very well said. It surely does come with a lot of experience. So, Milan, your inputs here. What do you think as per your experience?
Yeah, see, I'll tell you, as Mohit rightly said, most of the firms ignore the legal or the contract side of it. They don't pay enough attention to it. They feel the commercials are the only important factor and the legality is not important. Okay. And we're not generally prepared for the worst. We're always generally prepared for things to be normal, BAU. Okay, but life is not as simple as that. So most of us don't invest into a robust contract, whether it's a customer contract or even an employee contract, or even negotiating a contract with your landlord, whatever it is. So I think you sign up hundreds of agreements and contract when you're doing a startup. Okay, and as you sometimes overcommit, undercommit, you have no damn idea what kind of legal liabilities are you taking on your head. Okay. And this is where sometimes when investor comes in, he steps in, he does a due diligence, he finds out, oh, there are unlimited liability clauses lying in your customer contract in case of an event. I think most of us ignore this, but it's a very critical part for it, not just because we all think if I have survived for next 2, 3, 4 years, this is all done, but it's not done. Yeah, but as a startup, you may have to give away few clauses, which is you need an advising because people will need, your customers may need some extra comfort by having some of those clauses, but you need to really understand that are they really critical? Can you really fight back? So I think a strong, constant legal advice is extremely important. And I don't think anybody can afford to ignore that.
True. Well said. Henna, anything to add on here?
Yeah, I think what Milan said is totally correct. And in fact, like you have agreements, like say with clients, you also have agreements which you may have with banks or creditors. Like even in those agreements, sometimes the clauses are pretty onerous. So it's always important to have some sort of legal help, like somebody overlooking it who can at least point out the potential places where it might be a problem in the future, and then accordingly you can take your commercial decision.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for that. That actually takes us to the last leg of our conversation. We've discussed some critical aspects earlier. So I just want from each of you some top pointers that you think, startup founders should consider for, approaching the demands that are there, especially at the growth stage. So each one of you can share those top pointers as well.
So I think as a startup, there are several things which a startup should consider. One is, are they really solving a problem which is scalable? Okay, so that they can grow. That's one aspect. Second is obviously having a right team. I think these are the most critical factors for any startup. If you have these two things, capital you will be able to successfully raise capital, because I think if you're not solving a real problem which is scalable, and you don't have the right team, very difficult to raise capital. Yeah. So I think that's the first factor. And then team includes your co-founding team includes your employees. And I'm sure while you're doing a startup, you're going to possibly have several mistakes which may happen in any of those. Important thing of what I've realized is to cut those losses the moment you realize it. Okay, because we kind of delay or kind of try to avoid those problems. And whether it's an employee or a co-founder, wherever you could have potentially made a mistake, there is a chance or a window for you to really correct that and stop those losses. Yeah, but and obviously a very important thing while you're doing a startup, you need to have all agreements, contracts, whether you're complying. Again, the problem what you're solving, are you trying to solve that problem legitimately or legally? Because you could solve a problem using illegal means is still not the right thing. So I think it's important for you to really validate your business model with several consultants, legal, chartered accountants, whoever they are, who really understand your business, to say that are you complying to the laws of the land, whether it is RBI, whether it is SEBI, depending upon the product, the services you're offering. So are you really compliant to what you are what you're offering? So your business model has to be kind of validated on legal and compliance route. And obviously, as a startup, you need to make sure that you are running at why a customer comes to a startup because of the agility. So a startup cannot forget the customer has a choice to go to an incumbent vendor or an incumbent method of doing things. When they're changing that, are you able to give them the agility what they're expecting? Okay, by the way, but being compliant, being all of that, so that agility is required and the speed of execution is very critical. And while we do all of this, I believe the most important thing for any startup is the quality of execution. Okay, while you build all of that, you may not be the first one. I mean, a lot of times people say I have a first mover advantage. Yes, you could have some first mover advantage, but to take some references, whether it was Google or WhatsApp, they were never the first product in the market. They were probably the 200th search engine. And if I really consider WhatsApp, it was probably the 50th instant messenger in the world. But they executed very, very well. So I think a startup should focus on executing the product or the service or whatever they're doing to be the best. And I keep iterating, you cannot offer a good product, you got to offer the best product or the best service. Okay, and which is where it is going to make a difference. So a good execution will not make you a winner, but the best execution will make you the winner. So, but at the pace and the agility. So with the best execution, you cannot forget the pace and the agility, which you still need to keep in mind. You cannot compromise best execution and have the agility is lost. So otherwise, a startup essence is lost. So that's really from from a startup's lenses. Yeah.
Perfect. Mohit, what do you have here to add from the lawyer perspective or the legal perspective that you say?
Firstly, Milan hit the nail on the head when he talked about execution, because that is what you do as an entrepreneur. You have a concept, you create a value, and you execute. And you need to have, from a legal perspective, your groundwork and your framework very much in place. So, like I said earlier, you need to have full control over your IP. If you have ownership over it, if you don't have ownership over it, make sure you establish that you have ownership, and you register ownership in your patent, in your copyright, your trademark, because these become very critical as the business acquires value over time. The second thing is have your housekeeping in order. So whether it's if you have a number of employees, have a proper employee policy, an ESOP plan. All your agreements have to be watertight in terms of your employees. You need to have a very tight control over finance and fundraising and the documentation. As you will raise subsequent round of finances, you need to be very clear about the nature of finance you take and the terms that you give to the financiers, as well as the rights that you offer them. So when it's not critical to offer a board seat very earlier on in the game, you should avoid doing that. And you should have minimal controls over your business till as far as possible. The only people who you cede control to are those who can add value to your business.
Thanks, Mohit. Thanks for those pointers. Henna, anything to add on your?
Yeah, so I think we've covered most of the points. I think, yeah, even when you look at financing, there are many options which people often don't know about, like especially like first-time entrepreneurs might not be aware, but apart from equity and CCPS, you can also raise like convertible debt. You also have like agreements for future equity. So there are many different options of raising money. Like it's not necessary that you have to in the initial stages give away a lot of rights. You can have these other sort of agreements, and in some cases the execution is even easier with, say, convertible debt as opposed to CCPS. So it's important to kind of have that advice from a legal perspective and a taxation and a practical perspective, and then sort of make that call. So I think, and also for branding, I think the important thing is when you're choosing the name of your company, it's important to check that, you know, this particular sort of name doesn't already exist, especially if you're looking at a particular line of business for trademarks and the way in which it's written. So what happens sometimes is you start using a name and you acquire customers and you acquire some sort of reputation. And then going down the line, like a third party shouldn't claim that, you know, you've stolen my IP or anything of that sort. So it's good to do that check initially.
Actually, it's a very, correct point, Henna, because I think a lot of people, once they have a startup with that particular line, trademark can certainly be quite a hassle and issue, especially I'm not sure if you're going in for fundraising and for a lot of other series stuff. So that can also be an issue. So thank you for pointing that out. And thank you, Henna. Thank you, Mohit and Milan, for actually taking time out for this interesting conversation and helping our audience understand, you know, how to go through these, especially this critical growth stage of a startup, covering all those aspects and those questions that they have. Thank you for addressing them and, making them understand this stage better. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Sania. Thanks, Milan. Thank you, Henna.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.